at the back, please stand up and stretch if this presentation goes on a little bit too long. And before we start, I just want to personally say thank you all for coming out. Saturday afternoon is a optimum time in most people's schedules, so I really appreciate that you're all here to speak with us with openness and transparency today. Before we kick off this little presentation, I'm going to pass the mic over to Father Dan, Friar Dan, and then we'll get going.
So before we begin, I'd like to say the prayer of St. Francis. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy. O divine Creator, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Amen. So I'd like to introduce the panel at the front here. So on the far right is Tamil Bagnon. Sorry, I made a mess of her name. And Ken Venner, Asia Walker, Mark Love. Oh, so these are the B&A planning group on my right, and then on my left is Mark Love, who is on the Ad Hoc Committee. And I'd also like to introduce one of our apostolic trustees, Victoria Brills, who's in the second row in the back there. Shocking that she would sit in the back, not the front. And my name is Dan Burdick. I'm a Franciscan friar who lives at Mount St. Francis. I'm also on the Ad Hoc Committee with Mark Love and a couple other friars. I'm also definitor for the province of Holy Spirit. Now, what does all that mean? Well, it's probably not important. My name is Dan. Just call me Dan. That works. So I'm going to hand this over to Ken at this moment.
I will in turn hand it over to Asia, because I don't know if you saw me drinking the cough syrup. I'm losing my voice here, so Asia's going to rescue me and us and get us through the presentation. Thank you.
Ken gave our presentation this morning and has a 2-day back-to-back strategic management meeting for the next couple days. So I'm going to dig deep and get my performing arts background out and give this a presentation. As Dan said, my name is Asia Walker. I've been a part of the Cochrane makeup for many, many years. You see my old science teacher in the front row today, so that's super awesome. This is Bennett. I hope I get all this technical study information right, or else she'll take me out back for biology lesson and it's not going to go over well. Okay, so I'm not sure how many people here today, this is going to be your first time seeing any of this information. We have been going through a fairly comprehensive public engagement process. So some of this information may be new, may be old to you, may be new to you. So we're going to go through the process, what we've been doing with the Friars and the Franciscans of Canada up until this time. And then we're going to move ahead and talk about this area structure plan, or an ASP. Us planners really love our jargon and our acronyms. So if there's any time I say something that you don't get, just put your hand up and I'll go back and say that again. So the meeting, our meeting purpose today is to provide an update regarding the Holy Spirit Province of Canada's Southlands Initiative. This process, as I mentioned, has been ongoing for quite some time. We want to share the preliminary vision for the Southlands Area Structure Plan, engage in conversations with you folks, especially as stakeholders, answer questions that you have and that come out of this process, and what you may have learned as a question through conversations that have been had without us being here. And then finally, of course, to gather your comments to assist in the preparation of our area structure plan and what that process might look like. So on the screen now, you will see exactly the lands that we are talking about. The Southlands down with the red dotted line. Those are the lands we're talking about. However, the Friars and the Franciscans of Canada own all of this land that runs all the way up into Rocky View County, and those southlands that are in the town of Cochrane. In total, there's about 444, 450 acres of land. We are talking about approximately 140 acres of that land that is in the Cochrane boundaries that we are going to colloquially call today the Southlands. Here's just a perspective of the site. You can really kind of get a sense of the topography. You see how you're coming down Highway 1A there, and the site would be off obviously to the right. Encompasses the Cochrane Big Hill that we all know and love, that is part of the makeup of this place and has been since time immemorial. And you can see just a little bit of the community context here as well. You can see that the Southlands interacts with the highway, Cochrane Heights there to the west, the East End and the historic downtown community straight to the south. It is a key piece in the Cochrane puzzle that for a very long time has sat untouched, undisturbed, with all of this kind of growth pressure coming in around it. A little bit about the Franciscans. The retreat was established in 1949. The lands were gifted, in a way, sold, purchased through a benefactor directly to the Franciscans. And they've been there for 70 years, participating in a very quiet and spiritual way in the town of Cochrane. There are 10 facilities across Canada. Since 1949, membership has decreased. At one point, there was 550 active friars. They're down to about 50 active now and 80 in total. So, you know, they're getting on in age a little bit, and this is the outcome of what's happening here. Important to note that there has been a recent unification. The East and West, what they call provinces, have now become one provincial body of Canada. And in doing all of this, they are undertaking a strategic assessment of all of their land holdings across Canada. In 2015, in Lumsden, Saskatchewan, the Friars left that site. And just last year in 2018, the Martha Retreat Center in Lethbridge, the nuns there were from Antigonish out in Nova Scotia. They've also gotten rid of that site and have returned home. So this is a process that's happening for a lot of these facilities across Canada, and this is being a jewel and a real important site for the Franciscans, really comprehensively taking a look at these lands and what may be the future for them. When we started as consultants with for the Franciscans, we were given 5 very key guiding principles that we were instructed to adhere to at all times. They were to guide our discussions with the public, they were to guide our discussions with any technical folks that we engaged to do studies on the land, and they were to guide any potential future policy that we were to write as consultants. You can see them here on the screen, and we've talked about them relentlessly before, and we'll hear about them again because it's an opportunity for us to really respect and acknowledge the special nature of this client in the Franciscans. We are expected to honor the land, the history, and the heritage of the current owners. We are expected to respect the natural topography of the land and the resulting landscape. Anyone who has been up on that site, anyone who has even looked up there from the town, understands the significance and the spiritual connection to that the top of that hill and that entire landscape really has. We are expected to continue environmental stewardship of the lands. We've heard a number of we've heard from a number of people that there are all kinds of different populations who are on that land. Yes, there's the friars, and yes, there's us who trespass. But there's also birds, and there are bees, and there are bunnies, and there are all kinds of different wildlife up there that don't recognize borders, that don't understand what an area structure plan is, that we are expected to respect. We are expected to improve mobility and access to the site. Currently, the Franciscans have been very generous, allowing anyone access to the land to use in a very passive and recreative way. But there are folks who won't be able to do that because they are either wheelchair bound, they have mobility issues. We are expected to improve that access if anything were to happen on the lands, and potentially help ease some of the other mobility concerns that are in the town, be it vehicular or non-vehicular. And finally, we are expected to build enhanced relationships. The friars, as I said, have been here for 70 years. They want to get to know their neighbors. They want to get to be a little bit more significant presence in the town. And this is a good opportunity for them to do that. So we have 3 goals in taking a look at the Southlands. The first is to create an alternative purpose for the Southlands. It is to look at the lands, analyze them, study them, see what the land can support and what it can't, and use that to build our plan. Establish a statutory plan to provide future certainty. There are a number of plans that have been going on in and around the Friars without them having any kind of say in what is going on in and around their lands. And we'll get into some of that later on. And then finally, creating a lasting legacy. Having been here for 70 years, and Friar mentioned earlier today, he said that the Friars think in centuries. They don't think in decades or years or months or seasons. It's centuries. So what will they leave behind when they are gone, and what can they provide for the town as their lasting legacy? So just about the structure of this ad hoc committee that you see in front of you, the Holy Spirit Province, the official Canadian body, is above all of us. They have directed the ad hoc committee, which you see the 4 gentlemen here on the left-hand side, 2 of which are present today. Mark Love on your right, far right, and of course Dan Gurnick here. And then they have consulted with us. They have contracted us to come in and act as planning consultants. Ken, myself, and Samuel. So this timeline's a little bit small, and there's a better snapshot of it, as you'll be able to see later. But all the way back to 2017 is the amount of time we've been engaged with the Friars. We started with a very preliminary desktop planning study to take a look at the land and see, just from a 10,000 feet level, what may be able to happen. And then through that, we have gone forward in the process with them since that time. We've done some preliminary land exploration. That decision was made to pursue some technical studies, which started in June 2018. Preliminary online stakeholder engagement followed that, so starting to bring other people into the conversation, let them know that there's something going on with the lands. The unification process and the 70-year anniversary celebration happened in November of last year. And then between January and April, we started holding some more in-person and in-depth stakeholder meetings with the public. We talked to the school board. We talked to a couple of the significant groups in Cochrane, such as Bike Cochrane, the Cochrane Historic Preservation Society, and the Big Hill Creek Preservation Society. Really key players who will be directly influenced by any decisions that happen on this land. We held a public open house in April. There was a wonderful traffic and transportation discussion that happened sort of with council, I suppose, in May and June, as we started talking about long-term transportation upgrades to the infrastructure in the town. And then in June, back in June, we went through this next gate, we call them as planners. We went through this gate of the community enhancement evaluation process with town council. We went to them, we explained the process that we've been going through. And what we did at that time is we presented them with 3 different scenarios about what the land may potentially hold and what an area structure plan might potentially have in it at some point in time if the area structure plan was to go ahead. We took those 3 scenarios, we took them to council. They were able to provide their feedback to us as obviously key stakeholders, just as you folks are. Council, administration, their opinions matter too. They gave us clear direction to not tarnish the integrity of the hill and granted us permission to proceed. We took those 3 scenarios, packaged them up, and gave them to the ad hoc committee. And in September 2019, a decision was made by the province, the Canadian province, the overseeing body of all of this, to pursue an ASP for those Southlands. And since then, we've moved along with some of our preliminary studies. We're doing this kickoff today for the open house. And there will be ongoing public engagement. Further studies will be done in order to inform the ASP and ensure that what we put forward will actually be able to happen on the lands at some point if it decides to happen at all. And then, I know Mark's probably going to kick me, but it'll probably be in the first, let's say the first quarter of 2020 is when we expect to put forward a draft of this area structure plan to council for their debate, for the public hearing, which will be open obviously to the public, and a decision then will be made to either grant that ASP into statutory, and then it they are in law and part of what the makeup of the town of Cochrane is, or they will send us back to the drawing board and we will try again. So this was the direction given. Franciscans wish to pursue an area structure plan, which is a statutory or legal plan to guide and direct future land use, subdivision, and development to establish what we're considering to be the highest and best use for those southlands. All of these considerations down below, input from the neighbors, the Franciscans' needs, best planning practices, key, especially to me, is long-term environmental preservation and goals, and of course, with an understanding that future technical studies and future public engagement has to happen. This is an ongoing, transparent, back and forward conversation, and all of these considerations will inform our ongoing creation of this area structure plan. This is just a graphic kind of summarizing what I just explained. We took all of these inputs from the top. The Ad Hoc Committee processed that, turned it around, tried to decide what the best way forward would be. We put forward a recommendation to the Ad Hoc Committee, who took it forward to the Holy Spirit Province of Canada. That recommendation was endorsed, and now it's up to us to go ahead and take that recommendation and create an area structure plan, a plan for the lands, a document that encompasses planning policies, visions, goals, and those guiding principles that we talked about earlier, mapping and technical studies to ensure that what we're proposing isn't just pie in the sky, but could actually be implemented in future days. As I mentioned, we have gone through some preliminary technical studies on the land. We've done a historical impact assessment, an environmental impact assessment, a biological impact assessment, and some geotechnical studies. These are obviously very preliminary. It's very important for us to understand, as I mentioned before, what the land can and can't support. There's no point in proposing a hot air balloon launch pad if the hot air balloon launch pad cannot be supported by the lands, and it's going to slip and slide down the hill. Just so you know, there's no hot air balloon launch pad proposed for the lands right now. Please go put it on the board in the back though, because I'd like to see that. Our historical considerations, you can see from the site here, nothing of historical significance that the province, which is the body that oversees this, would consider historically significant, except you can see at the top of the screen there, off of our site, there are two locations that we did find some very interesting artifacts. The one that is of, I believe, of most importance to us in this conversation today is that Southern Star that Ken is highlighting right there. There was evidence found of pre-contact campsite artifacts there. And what this is lithics. It is stone tools that would have been used by some sort of indigenous person many, many, many years ago. You would go walking there and it would look like a rock. But these people have found this rock and have identified it as something of historical significance, which is really interesting because, again, as I said, this place has obviously been of significance, the top of that hill, since time immemorial. And it'll be very interesting as we continue our engagement to begin pursuing what that might look like. Our biological considerations, this map, if anyone saw our initial map earlier, will look different. Biological considerations go on obviously all year. We did fall-winter studies last year, spring-summer studies this year. This has changed a little bit. You can see the native grassland, which is the yellow at the bottom. It is quite significant down there. There is this benchland area, the flatter lands with the purple there, that's less native. There's some semi-native in there as well as non-native. And then of course you can see the native grassland at the top and then the treed areas in the back. Our geotechnical considerations, we drilled holes all over the place on this hill, very non-intrusive holes, to make sure that we don't have some of the same issues that Cochrane has faced in the past on some of the sloping lands that the town has. What you'll see here in the red is obviously no-go. There's significant slopes in there, but the white is a slope under 0 to 15%. And you can see again, it kind of encompasses that benchland area. So we use this as a starting point, along with the other studies that we found, to begin taking a look at what an alternative purpose for the lands might look like. A summary of our stakeholder engagement. You can see we have talked to quite a few people in the past. There's been participation from a number of different communities in Cochrane and beyond. again, I think it speaks to the significance of the site. This is obviously very important land, not just to people who live in Cochrane, not just people who live adjacent to the site, not even just to the Friars, but there is a significance to this land, and people are interested in seeing what happens. This is a summary of the key themes that we've heard, and these are things that have been told to us a number of times, and we still want to hear from you today and reiterate some of this, whether or not we've got it right, because this is an iterative process. You will tell us something, we will adjust, we will spit it back to you and say, is this correct? Some of the big things, of course, what we've heard is transportation. Cochrane Heights and Sunterra are single access communities. This is difficult when there's 27,000 school buses coming up and down the hill 2 times a day, but it's also very difficult for when there's any sort of an emergency up there. So as a single access community, perhaps there's something that can be done through this process that may be able to help resolve some of those concerns. Traffic congestion, as I said, highway, not only on 4th Ave, but up highway. I mean, we've all sat in the line all the way up the hill. I was late to one of our engagement sessions because I miscalculated my time, and I was stuck on the top of the hill. So we recognize that, especially at peak hours, going in and out of Cochrane up the hill to access Calgary, most likely, is a concern. The site is home to diverse wildlife and vegetation. Absolutely, we've heard that. Cougars, moose, anything, wintering grounds for ungulates. There's an absolute diversity in this on these lands, and we are not the only people, we are not the only animals who use this land. The Big Hill is obviously an important part of Cochrane's identity. We've been there, it's been part of my life forever, and we have been told very clearly by a number of different stakeholders that we are absolutely to preserve the integrity of that hill. Public access to the hill is important. So is slope stability concerns down along 4th Avenue. We've also heard that there has been appreciation for these early engagement opportunities. People seem quite happy to be able to come out and talk about the stories they have of the hill, the stories they have of the Franciscans and the Mount, the time they've spent there and the relationships they have with them. And of course, there is obviously a deep respect for the people who have stewarded this land for the last 70 years, and the hope that they will continue to do so for 70 more. There are other studies and information that we need to take into consideration as well that go beyond the scope of the town of Cochrane and even the greater region. The province runs the highways, and the province has ideas for what's going to happen on Highway 1A to try and alleviate some of the issues that you folks face on a daily basis. Key to this is this potential Highway 1A jug handle. This is what this is called. It's essentially an off-ramp that would take traffic off of Highway 1A and put it onto this jug handle in order to go south and into the town, therefore freeing up the flow of traffic down the highway. You can see very clearly that it's on the Franciscans' lands. This is news to them. This happened without any kind of consultation with them, without their knowledge. But this is a plan. This is a plan that that the province is considering for to help alleviate some of the traffic up Highway 1A. There's improved intersection connections both on 5th Ave as well as Center. And just this week, your budget was passed and that the design for the widening of Center Avenue was approved. So this is moving ahead as well. And then finally, of course, off the screen, we know that eventually, God willing, the Highway 22 and the 1A interchange will be finished and fixed, and that will also help alleviate some traffic concerns as it backs up the hill, as you turn to go south down 22 towards the main highway, and out obviously further down Highway 1A as well. So back in June, we went to this process called the Community Enhancement Evaluation, presented to the city, to the town. This is their evaluation criteria. Anyone who does anything in Cochrane, whether it's a new subdivision, a redevelopment, a new business, anything, they need to go through this gate and check all of these boxes. Will you be able to provide, or at least contribute to, a safe and walkable and vibrant community? Will you maintain scenic views? Will you incorporate exemplary building design? How can you promote sustainable development? They make you go through this process, they make you rank yourself and then present, and then they will tell you how you did. Because at that time, back in June, we didn't have any concepts. We had no idea what the lands might hold. We were still going through this preliminary engagement. We were talking to people. We really had nothing to show them. We didn't have a concept to show them. So what were we going to do? Well, we decided that why don't we run them through a number of scenarios, from A, being minimal, very small, formalized development on the hill, all the way up to scenario C, which would be a comprehensive neighborhood expansion. Here is our scenario A, a big hill environmental park. Think of it as your nose hill of Cochrane. It would promote connectivity for sure. There would be pedestrian connections, public gathering space. Don't really know what to do about that chug handle sitting in there. And there's also a consideration about who's going to look after this land. Who's going to maintain the land? Is the town going to buy the land? Is it going to be deeded? Is there going to be, who's going to maintain it? Who's going to make sure the pathways are paved? Who's going to make sure there's no issues in all seasons? So that was something that we had to consider. Even though we were able to put some of these pathways up here, have that public gathering space on the top, was the town willing to download that infrastructure cost, and how would they pay for it? So we considered a minor neighborhood expansion, a Sunterra Phase 2, if you will, bringing maybe some sort of a community. And I do want to stress that yellow on the screen is going to be a mix of community uses. It's going to be residential, it's going to be green space, it's going to be networks and connections, and all kinds of different things. It's not all residential all the time. Yes, so, okay, what does this look like then? Well, how are you going to get cars in there? How are you going to service these new Suntarians? I maybe call them that. We've heard that 4th Avenue will not support any more traffic. Please do not run any more traffic up there, for the love of God. Okay, great. How are we going to get people in and out of that place then? And it certainly doesn't fix the single access problem that we've heard over and over again. And of course, putting a little community out there doesn't create a complete community. It just puts more houses on a hillside, burdening a single access. How do we resolve that? So we looked, okay, what if we put a road in? What if we put another access in? It would help alleviate some of the traffic coming in and off of off of the highway, yes, but also off of 4th Ave. You could get the folks who live in the new Sunterra in and out of the community. Maybe even the first Sunterra people will be able to get onto the highway and out to Calgary a little bit faster. But that's an expensive road. Even if we were to build a road, it's not going to, even if the road was to be built, you have to be able to pay for that road. Again, so now you've got a park, you've got maybe a little neighborhood and a road. Who's going to pay for that? There's not enough development to leverage the cost of that road as that currently stands. So we looked a little bit further at a comprehensive neighborhood expansion. What would it look like to be able to put some sort of amazing institutional use right at the pinnacle of that hill, at the pinnacle of the hilltop? The pinnacle of the hilltop is not going to be touched. I just want everyone to say that. This is kind of at the edge of the benchlands, overlooking the valley. What would it look like as a civic hub, as a gathering space for people? Would it be a performance hall? Would it be a library? Could it be a Banff Center in Cochrane? Who knows? But imagine the opportunity that would provide. A little bit further community development would be able to leverage the costs of that road. And what we came to is that this was the greatest opportunity to generate revenue and finance those infrastructure costs. So we presented these 3 scenarios to the Community Enhancement Evaluation Team and to Council, ranked ourselves. You can see that scenario C ultimately ended up coming to the top because we were able to fulfill all the requirements that the town would have on any sort of future development that would happen in that area. The Southlands ASP will be focused on this scenario concept. We packaged our recommendations, as I said, passed them off to the Ad Hoc Committee, who put it up to their provincial body, the Franciscans of Canada, who came back to us in support of this scenario. This is a holistic plan that would put thoughtfully placed residential neighborhood within the benchlands. It will accommodate new amenities that align with the Franciscans' values and their mission. It will create a community focal point and provide views and vistas all the way through the site. It'll provide improved transportation infrastructure while preserving environmentally sensitive areas through environmental reserve dedication. I think it's really important to stop here and emphasize it will be preserved in perpetuity by putting a statutory plan in place. In perpetuity. We will accommodate open space connections and will legitimize public access to Cochrane Big Hill. As I said before, the Franciscans have been very generous allowing people passive recreation on their hillside, but it does create a liability for them. If something was to happen to somebody on their lands, they are liable for it. By creating formal public access, not only are you preserving these lands in perpetuity, but you're allowing access for all kinds of people to come up and enjoy the lands at that time. So, what is an ASP? What is an area structure plan? It is a collective series of policies. It is some mapping. It is the technical studies for transportation and servicing, made large. And it will be adopted by law and put onto the lands as what the plan would be for the future. The plan would be. Ken, if you can just go back one slide, you'll see that the area structure plan is there. There is a series of other plans and amendments and updates that have to happen after the area structure plan is adopted. And I think it's important also to stress that the area structure plan is where our mandate stops. We are not, at this time, doing a neighborhood plan, which needs to be in place in order to build anything. We are not doing any land use bylaw amendments, we're not subdividing anything, no development permits, no building permits. Our mandate stops at the area structure plan, and I think Friar Dan said it best this morning. Once that process is done, we pause, we take a breath, we reconsider, and I believe, nothing will continue until the body meets in 2022 to continue on the process and see what might happen next. And I think that just dovetails really well into where we are. This is our open house kickoff. We want to gauge your reaction to this. We want to hear your feedback. We'd like to know what that institutional use might look like for you. We want to know what you want for public space and open space. We want to see, we want to get your feedback. That's what we're here to do. We want to hear what you have to say. Ongoing engagement will happen all the way through to the submission of our draft ASP. At the time, there will be a public hearing where the public will be able to have their say to council, and council will then decide whether to